This is the mouth to Dunn's Creek. That shore of Dunn's Creek all the way down to Crescent Lake was Denny Roll's plantation, so that was his land holding. Now this is the north end of what is Murphy's Island. It's actually there's a series of little smaller little islands right here before you get to the main part of Murphy's Island.
Right.
But this is Dunn's Creek. So this is one of our Bartram sites, the creek. We're fortunate in that Dunn's Creek State Park is also now being established. It's only just opened as a state park. Now, as far as Dunn's Creek and as a Bartram site, it was not until the return trip, after the Bartrams had already gone all the way as far south as they could on the St. Johns River, and they returned back to their point of departure up in Jacksonville, that they came back and ventured up Dunn's Creek. So they came up, and this was the end of January, came up, stayed at Spaulding's Lower Store again, and then their boat was rowed up here to Dunn's Creek, and instead of heading on back up to Rollstown, they went and ventured up Dunn's Creek and down to Crescent Lake. When they got down, they traversed the entire creek, and then right when they got to the north end of Dunn's Lake, they established a campsite right there on the north end of the lake. And then the next morning they set out into the lake and went down as far as what they called a small island in the lake.
That could only be it.
Yep, and so they got off on the island and explored the island, collected plants and seeds and the like, and then they went back up and camped again at their campsite the next night, and then the next morning back up the creek and up to Rollstown, where they spent the subsequent night. So they did get down into Dunn's Creek. So so this is one of the entire creek is in a Bartram site for us. A little more noteworthy site is Murphy Island, which is where we'll head on up to. There are two things that go on with Murphy's Island. First is that the Bartrams are passing by, and they did make a stop here in 1765 on their way to Spaulding's Lower Store, and this would have been the day after Christmas, or excuse me, Christmas Day, that they stopped at Murphy Island, and they went ashore here and they did some exploration, and they do write about, and this will be in John Bartram's journal. One of the things you mentioned, the importance of the journaling and how handy that is. That the other interesting thing about this as a Bartram site is that when William Bartram came back in 1774, he had stopped at Rollstown and was headed down to Spaulding's Lower Store. Spaulding's Lower Store, of course, was going to be his base of operations. And because of its preeminence in terms of a shipping point, a jumping off point into the Native American territory, it was quite an active hub in East Florida. So there were ships that were coming in at Mayport, mouth there near Jacksonville, and coming all the way up the river to Spaulding's Lower Store, because that's where the commerce between the Native Americans, and this extended, according to Catherine Braun, all the way up to the Mississippi Valley. I mean, goods, trade goods, as far as there, were making it to little old Spaulding's Lower Store, through the Indian chain. Yeah, and making it here. And where they were trading with the Spanish and the English. At the time that William Bartram, of course, he had stopped there when he came down with his dad, but when he was coming back on his second trip, now he packaged up a lot of his art stuff, because he's got to collect samples, he's got to do the artwork, because that's what he's commissioned to do. I'm going to send a lot of my supplies down to Spaulding's Lower Store. I'll make that my base of operations at Central, because I want to go down and kind of retrace what I did with Dad, and Spaulding's Lower Store is the midpoint. Perfect. You know, I'll operate out of there, I'll stay there, they can put me up, and I can go back and visit these places and have my supplies right there where I need them. So he shipped that stuff down. Well, as it happened, there was an Indian uprising that occurred just prior to his departure from Savannah to come down this way, and he got word of this departure of this Indian uprising. It delayed his trip, trying to get news. Well, you know, there's a lot of unrest on the frontier. Do you really want to go down there? Probably not. Let's wait and see how things settle out. And so, so he delayed his trip until he got word that, okay, things seem to have settled out. There was a little misunderstanding, but that's all good now. Well, so when he's coming down the river, he's stopped off at Denny Roll's place up there, and then he's back in his little boat, and he's headed for Spalding's Lower Store, and it's just a reasonable day's travel, so it's perfect. Well, he's heading by, and he gets over here. He gets a little confused because of the openings between. I mentioned there are a couple little islands, and it can be confusing. So he got down right over here in his little boat. Now, it's been 9 years since he was here before. So consequently, you know, memory may or may not serve you. But he's thinking, well, I think I'll follow the big water and I'm probably okay. So as he's going by, he's fairly confident that this is the way. But as he's passing by here, and all of a sudden somebody, hey, you! And he's saying, what the heck is that? And there's a guy standing over here right on that bluff, you see, and he's going like this, hey, white guy. Says, where are you going? And so he paddles over to the thing there and says, hey, what's up? And he says, yeah. He says, who are you? You know, what are you doing here? I said, yeah, we're from Spalding's Lower Store. So they had some unrest. You probably heard, yeah, how's that happening? Well, he says, we've got all your stuff over here. We buried it right up there where that kiosk is. We buried your stuff over there because we were afraid the Indians were going to come and raid the lower store, so we took all the stuff over here. It's an island, you know, it's easily defended, they know where it is, and we're here to kind of watch over it. And so anyway, he says...
Were they Indians that were yelling at him?
No, they were Europeans. So consequently, they say, yeah, well, hey, Billy, you know, yeah, we've been waiting on you. We got word that you were coming down. Your stuff, and you know, arrived, but we moved it over here, so it's all safe. We'll be moving it back there now that we know you're here and everything. So head on down for dinner, and we'll get your stuff out of the hole and chase it down. So at that point, they, you know, Billy, he's kind of toured the island, so he doesn't say much about it other than the fact that he came over and talked with him, and they told him the story, and then he gets back in his boat. So he wasn't, his charge was a little different from what John Bartram's charge was. So when he got back here, he had already walked on the island and said, yeah, we've been there, done that, and just, you know, if it hadn't been for the guys hailing him, probably would have passed it right on by.